Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest Power Up series by TopStep. I'm Ron Brove, CEO. Our topic today is secrets to managing invoice layouts. OpenAir invoice layouts provide a flexible, powerful opportunity to communicate project financials both internally and externally. We have customers that use these for internal review. We typically see those called as pro forma invoices. But we also have customers that also use this as customer-facing invoices, as we do here at TopStep. The key here is customizing the invoice layouts to accommodate the multiple use cases. The invoice layouts can show or hide details as well as show or summarize details. We'll go through some of the tips and tricks that we see in maximizing the uses of OpenAir invoices. So let's start off by how do we get to the invoice layouts? So under administration, under invoices, we can see whatever list of invoice layouts have been created. And we often see multiple options here. And a big reason is for a lot of customers, for example, are time and material. And sometimes your time and material, you'd want to include more details. Who did it, which day, but sometimes your customer may only need to see a summarized version of that same data. So that's where you can have multiple invoice layouts, as well as if you are using OpenAir for expenses, you can have dedicated expense layouts, but also commingle service-based fees and expense-based fees, which we'll show you in a moment. So being able to create multiple layouts is key. You can even have client-specific layouts. If you have client-specific layouts or layouts that multiple clients benefit from, we recommend that you are able to, on a client record, under the billing information, you can store the invoice layout that you want to default when creating invoices. This will keep you from having to edit the invoice, change the layout on the invoice properties. This will allow you to default the invoice layout. Now, we have some customers that actually do this at a project level, not at a customer level, because some projects might be fixed fee, and they may have a fixed fee layout. Some projects might be other T&M, so that would require a different layout. So you can also do that rather than doing it at the customer level. If I go to my projects, I can see here in my project, I can see my invoice layout option. Now, if you don't set an option, there is a default option. So when you create an invoice layout, you can select that this is the default layout, and that will automatically be used when you create invoices. But certainly we see more and more where you can override the layout here. And again, shortcuts the creation and getting the correct layout. So let's talk about what goes into the layout and what are some of the features and decisions you make when you're creating these layouts. First off, here we can set, is this the default layout or not? And you can only have one default layout. So if you check this, it will uncheck any others. What amount of detail are you looking to add to your invoice? So here we say we are looking at just the service or expense category and other information. But here we can say, do we want to see the notes or description, or one or the other or both, the job code, the hours? There's a lot of fields in here that you won't use, but there's a lot of fields you could add that could benefit your end user, whether it be internally or it be your customer. So it's key here that you determine what level of detail and what information you want to display. Now, if you are commingling expenses and time or expenses and milestone billings on the same invoice layout, if you don't defer a specific expense layout for expenses, it's going to look funny. You're going to get unusual columns showing data that doesn't add up. So OpenAir allows you to create an expense-specific layout. So this will give you the expense category, the cost, the quantity, things that are more expense-related. And then you can embed that layout inside of a different layout so that you actually have two layouts for the same invoice. And this allows you to be able to have a specific columns for the expenses and specific columns and details for the time or fixed fee billings. Now, let's decide, are we going to group our data? How do we want to group our data? If we want to group our data and all, there's a couple of ways to do that. The simplest way to do that is here at the invoice grouping options. You'll see there's a lot of ways you can group it by project. If you are using multiple projects on a single invoice, we could do it by service. If it's expense category, you could do it by that. So a lot of different ways. By task, you can summarize or group the invoice. And then you can either suppress or show a subtotal for each invoice grouping. So that could be really helpful. You can also use the combining of charges in addition. So this way, I'm saying I want to combine all my charges that are the same service or my expenses that are the same category, and then I can choose how do I want to combine those by. By service, you could do it by day, you could do it by week or by month. So a lot of different ways, and you can have multiple of these. You could say by user by day, I want to summarize some of this data, or by user by week. So if you, for example, if you're showing a lot of time on your expense layout or invoice layout, you'd be able to go through and summarize that by week. So again, depending on what you're trying to convey in your messaging, what your customer's expecting to see in order to get the invoice paid as quickly as possible, or just so that it conveys to the project manager what the customer is going to see so they can approve it, this is really helpful. We also see where you might want to, if you are using expenses and billing expenses, pass through, we see a lot. And you want to bundle some of your expense categories. Maybe you have taxi and airfare and rental car, all as separate expense categories. But on the invoice, you want to show those as travel. So here we can come in and we can create a custom category name and be able to combine those types of categories into a single category name and display that on the invoice. So that could be really helpful, again, to streamline the data that you are sharing with your end customer. We'll get into some of these other options. There's some really nice pearls of functionality in here. First, we can customize the from. If we don't put anything here, it's going to use the default address stored in OpenAir based on the company information. So, but you may want to have this come from a PO box or from some accounts receivable address that's different than your primary address. So this is where we can customize the from as well. We can also add different contact information, or we can determine if you're using OpenAir's sent feature, you can determine the sent email that the invoice comes from. We can use the sort order. How do we want to sort the invoice details? Lots of different sorting options. And then a secondary sort. We can control some of the spacing as well. And if we're doing any sort of invoice notes, you can store those invoice notes at a project level, or you can store those on a properties. We can determine where do we want those invoice notes to show up. If we want to show any additional information here, this would be where we would show additional payment information, wiring information, additional how to pay the invoice information. This is where we can put that additional information and have that visible on the invoice. If you're looking to show outstanding balances, if you want to show almost like what do you owe us in addition to this invoice, you can include that information into this invoice. If we're using taxation in OpenAir and we want to have the tax breakout different, we can use this feature here that allows us to break down taxes based on tax rates. So that could be really helpful. If we're showing hours, do we want to show the minimum decimal places, 2 decimal places? That can be really helpful. Also, in the header of the invoice, we can show additional detail. So we can choose, let's say we want to bring in the project owner into the header of the detail of the invoice. So we can come in and show the project owner. We can show all fields that are project specific, as well as other fields that we can add into the header, again, helping to communicate to the customer. But we can also show header template here. So here I'm bringing in terminology date, invoice terms. I'm bringing all that in using also some HTML. So this could be very helpful. We can use attachments in OpenAir. So if you're using, for example, expenses, and you want to include the expense receipts that are being billed on the invoice, you can show those attachments as well. This would be more so if you're sending the invoice using OpenAir's send function and have that attachment link available to the customer. Logos. So, this is real critical. We have customers that have different logos for different subsidiaries, different acquisitions, and being able to have each logo specific to the resources that are doing the work. And then also, if you're looking for fancying up a bit, being able to upload a footer. And this is where you can create an image. We've had another customer that's marketing department created an image with all the pay information and other information that they wanted to convey, and then you can upload that footer to show at the bottom of the invoice. It makes it fancy, a little fancier and more graphically appealing. Invoice terminology can also be critically important. Changing some of the terminology. You may have a customer where you want to change certain things. So maybe you want to change VAT to tax, or expense category to expense types. You may want to call the invoice a pro forma invoice rather than just an invoice. So these are some of the common terminologies. We've also got customers that have organizations outside the US where they're sending the invoice to their customers, and they need to be able to represent in German or in French. And so here we use the terminology overrides to go in and add the foreign language equivalent of some of this terminology to the invoice. And so that could be a real big help for European outside of the US organizations. So you can see there's quite a bit of terminology options. There's some Adobe PDF settings. We can adjust the margins. We can show how we want the invoice to be portrayed. We can adjust the bottom margin as well. We can update the font size. There's a few font options, not a great deal, but a few. We can also give the invoice a title. So a lot of times we'll say this is pro forma invoice, which is a way to print this big on top of the invoice, or this is a credit invoice. Those are different options, and it really kind of shows what the invoice is all about. And then if you have some custom remit to addresses, this is another way to show those. So all of these different settings can be really combined to really make effective invoice layout options and be able to have multiple versions where you can use for both internal and external, and really be able to maximize the power of OpenAir and being able to display all the rich financial information that you get on a month-by-month basis. Thank you for joining this Power Up series by TopStep. As you may know, TopStep is the leading provider of business solutions focused on OpenAir product for professional services. Want to know more? You can follow us on LinkedIn or check out our website. Thank you very much. Have a great day.